Hey everybody, let's do some math today. The Dehydrator is a brand new artisan machine added in Stardew Valley's 1.6 patch. That means there are going to be quite a few 1.6 spoilers in this video, or I mean at least a couple. Anyway, be warned. Along with the fish smoker, this gives us new ways to process artisan goods to make a little extra cash on the farm. I think the fish smoker is actually pretty cut and dry. Maybe we'll go over that later if there's interest, but I don't think it's that tough. Today though, I want to go through some math on the Dehydrator instead. If you're just here for the TLDR though, dehydrators are best for high value, low quality fruits like a normal quality starfruit, for example. But you're probably not going to want to get rid of your kegs because you're going to still make more money from kegs in the long term. You also need to make raisins with the dehydrator, so you're going to want one no matter what, and those are for something special in the game that I don't really want to get into. Mushrooms are a completely different animal, but in my opinion, once you have artisan and botanist, there's no reason not to use the dehydrator for every single mushroom unless you need it for some specific purpose. If that's all you needed, thanks for stopping by. If you want to like the video on the way out, that would be awesome. And if you want to check my math or look at anything, there's a link to the sheet in the video description. So we can now purchase the dehydrator recipe from Pierre for 10,000 gold. Or you can get one for free for choosing mushrooms when Demetrius asks what you want to do with your cave. Coincidentally, that's actually the exact same price as buying both an apple and a pomegranate tree from Pierre, so if you want to roll the dice hoping to find fruit for the community center, you can pick up the recipe using the money you would have spent on the trees anyway. I still think it's kind of a toss-up, though you're probably going to want a dehydrator at some point, and it might be nice to get it in spring, you know, if you're making that money early, and then plant the trees in summer so you can get the fruit in fall, but, you know, it's your call, it doesn't matter. That said, I don't really think that the dehydrator is like the be-all end-all. You don't necessarily need to rush for it because it's probably not going to like blow your whole game wide open. But let's head over to the spreadsheet here and just take a look at, you know, maybe a couple of things you might not expect. On our first page here, we're just going to compare the different artisan machines for fruit, right? So we have the preserves jar, we have the keg, and we have the dehydrator. This is old info, so if you actually already know the math for the preserves jar and the kegs and you want to, you can just skip to the next timestamp. Anyway, we have the preserves jar here, right, which creates jellies worth twice the value of the base fruit that you put into there, plus 50 gold. The lower your fruit's base price is, the better the value of the preserves jar. This artisan machine takes about 2.5 days to finish, with a little bit of wiggle room depending on when you go to bed and if there are any festivals and a couple other things, but I'm just going to assume 2.5 days just for the math. The wiki says that the breakpoint for the preserves jar versus the keg is when you have a fruit value of about 50 gold here, so I went ahead and I marked those in both bold text and in a blue background. The problem with that is that when we're looking at these, you're getting, you know, an item that's the same value whether you go preserves jar or keg, but there's more to the story. You know, we also want to know how much additional value per day we're getting. You're not always going to want to necessarily keg your inexpensive fruits, so we'll kind of dig into that a little bit as well. The keg works in a pretty similar way, right? Fruit goes in and wine comes out 7 days later. Technically 6.25 days. I am going to use 7 days for the math here just because as a player, that's what's easiest for me. Though that does devalue the keg just very slightly on my spreadsheet compared to like the wiki, but the keg is still far and away, you know, a better value for your fruit than the preserves jar is, at least once you have fruit that's actually worth something. So the dehydrator, though, works a little bit differently, right? So instead of, you know, 7 days or 2.5 days or whatever, it just takes 1 day. And instead of one fruit, you need 5. And you get 7.5 times the value of the fruit that you put in, plus 25 gold. That means that our calculations for the dehydrator are kind of like a weird Frankenstein's monster of keg and preserves jar calcs, right? With preserves jars, lower base price fruit is more efficient since more of the value ends up coming from the 50 gold rider, where with the kegs, you want to utilize a higher value input fruit, and that'll create a higher value wine. But the tricky part is that since we do need 5 of any fruit, you know, with the dehydrator, the additional 25 gold is actually really only 5 gold per item, which we'll kind of see in an interesting way later. And the 7.5 times multiplier is really more like a 1.5 times multiplier. That means that the preserves jar is definitely still the king for low-valued fruits, and honestly, I would argue that in most cases it's just as good as the keg anyway, but that's a different video. But we're here talking about the dehydrator, and is that even worth it since the keg has that 3 times multiplier instead? The answer, unfortunately, is it kind of depends. Let's look on the first page at ancient fruit here, and just looking at the numbers, it looks like if you have enough fruit to dehydrate, you should, right? After all, dried ancient fruit is worth 1,400 gold more, right? We go from 4150. We go from 2750 to 4150. We get 1,400 gold more for doing a dehydrated fruit, and we're adding 280 gold of value per item per day, where the keg adds about 157. And again, that's not quite as generous because I'm assuming the keg takes 7 days, not 6.25. But either way, the math makes it look like we should probably be using the dehydrator for our ancient fruit. If you had an empire of ancient fruit growing, such that you could refill these every single day, it might be worth it. But the problem is that the dehydrators are going to consume more crops than you can reasonably grow, right? Ancient fruit are actually the perfect example for this because they take 7 days to regrow. One fruit takes 1 week to grow, and by the end of the week, you can have 1 bottle of wine, worth 1,650 gold with no modifiers, okay? If you had 5 ancient fruit produce on Sunday, you could turn them into 4,150 gold by the next day, right, with our dehydrator. Or if you're willing to wait a week and use the kegs, and you have 5 kegs open, you could have 8,250 gold the following Sunday. For a lot of you, that probably puts the nail in the coffin right away, right? Like that's like twice the value. But if you're thinking about how to squeeze the most money out of each individual day, as opposed to trying to get the highest value at the end of the week, it still might be worth it. But it kind of changes once we get some modifiers involved. Let's start on the left side here, and I'll just say, first of all, if you're using higher quality fruit in your dehydrators, you're literally going to start losing money at Iridium. So you could take, let's go back to ancient fruit, 5 Iridium ancient fruit, chuck them in the bin for 4,400 gold, or you could dehydrate them for 4,150. So yeah, that sucks, right? But hey, we don't really grow Iridium crops very often, right? So what about gold? Well, when I said earlier we'd see this weirdness with the number 5 being split out among them, this is what I'm talking about. This is when you have your 1.5 times multiplier, so you're making 25 gold more tomorrow if you dehydrate your gold fruit than you would if you just sold them today. And that 25 gold is just the bonus for using the dehydrator, right? So it's not looking good, I guess is the short version. On the other hand, if you have the artisan profession, the value of your dried fruits will increase by 40%, which is nothing to sneeze at. In order to get artisan, you have to have the tiller profession at 5, which increases the value of your crops by 10%, right? Unfortunately, the dehydrator still uses the absolute base value of the fruit, but the increased value from artisan does mostly cover the difference until iridium quality kicks in once again. So for example, with our star fruit here, we're getting to this 7,910 value, not from the 825 gold from the star fruit with tiller, but from the base 750 gold of the fruit itself. That's kind of disappointing, especially with the fish smoker retaining the quality of the item, which is, again, another conversation, but a lot of the math that Concerned Ape has used does work this way, so it's not super surprising. So yeah, as exciting as 7.5 times the value of fruit plus 25 gold sounds when you say it out loud, and it also takes a second, the dehydrator, it's not really a game changer. If you have the kegs available, you'd almost certainly prefer to have 11,550 gold from 5 ancient fruit wine right at the end of the week than the 5,810 gold tomorrow. And if you have something of lower value, like let's look at a cranberry, you're probably going to want to use the preserves jar instead because you're getting more value day by day. So the dehydrator is kind of in an awkward place. My recommendation as far as fruits go is to use it for overflow crops. I wouldn't build a quarry worth of dehydrators, right? But I'd use them for extra crops that would normally not make it to the kegs or to the preserves jars anyway. And for bananas. I actually think that those are like the perfect fruit for the dehydrator since they grow back every day, and their value at even gold quality is still pretty comparable with the preserves jar. If you had 5 banana trees and 3 dehydrators, you're set on like a perfect loop. But I would be really surprised if anyone is building their entire farm around the banana crop in particular. So I mentioned the mushroom cave at the beginning and that you get a free dehydrator if you pick that option. That's because the dehydrator can also be used to make dried mushrooms, right? The math here is quite a bit easier because there's nothing to compare. You can't use the preserves jar or the kegs or anything else. You should always use the dehydrator for mushrooms unless for some reason you have botanist, so you're getting iridium mushrooms, but you don't yet have artisan, so you're not getting that 40% bonus. That's the only time that I would not use this for all your mushrooms, unless you need them for something specific like a quest or whatever. I mentioned a TLDR at the beginning, and here's the medium length version of that. High value, low quality fruit is going to make the best use of the Dehydrator, but the problem with that is that those items are also best for the keg, which is going to give you more money, albeit a little more slowly. If you have enough kegs to turn every single high value fruit on your farm into wine, you should probably still do that. If you have more fruit than you can keg, the preserve jar is actually still the next best for value, and the Dehydrator, I think, is a good way to burn through your 600 cranberries, you filthy hoarder. But mushrooms should always go in the Dehydrator if you have artisan. Easy. Got it? Good.